They underestimated what they couldn't categorize. Every attempt to define, control, or dismantle your essence was based on a flawed understanding of who you truly are. They mistook your silence for submission, your detours for dead ends, your patience for weakness. But now, the illusion they clung to is falling apart, and in its place, they're confronting a truth so raw it leaves no room for denial. The very force they tried to eliminate has become the pulse that reveals their own shadows. Their strategies have collapsed under the weight of their arrogance, and they're left with nothing but the echoes of a story they can't rewrite. What they didn't realize is that the tension in your journey wasn't accidental. It was precise. Every closed door, every false accusation, every sleepless night was a calibration, not a curse. The sequence wasn't random. It was choreography. While they scrambled to sabotage your path, the groundwork for their unraveling was being silently poured. And now, those same moves they thought would secure their dominance have become the coordinates of their exposure. Not because you fought back in the way they expected, but because you never needed to. Their downfall was woven into the same timeline they tried to twist around your throat. Now, as the dust settles, the contrast is too sharp to ignore. The person they once dismissed as disposable has become the mirror of everything they feared but couldn't admit. Their warnings about you have turned into revelations about themselves. What was once whispered in rooms behind your back is now being shouted inside their own minds, haunting every step they take. And in this reversal they never saw coming, the only story left standing is the one they tried to erase, the one that was never about revenge, but about restoration. No distortion could rewrite the essence that kept rising inside you. Long before they realized it, every misstep they took, every misleading word they planted in the minds of others, every scheme crafted behind closed lips, was being traced, quietly, thoroughly, without exception. What they believed was forgotten or buried had been carefully preserved, not by human memory, but by something far more exacting. And through it all, what emerged from your core wasn't bitterness, but clarity. Not a collapse, but a reckoning. In the face of subtle warfare meant to fracture your confidence, what surfaced was a refusal they couldn't compute, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't fight back, but simply doesn't yield. Their orchestration was never the masterpiece they imagined. What they considered precision was always illusion. While they believed they were the architects of your undoing, they were unknowingly walking deeper into a mirror they couldn't see. Every move they made under the assumption of dominance turned out to be a spotlight revealing their own fractures. Each psychological tactic, every manipulation, all their rehearsed performances, none of it remained in the dark. Instead of shaking your foundation, they were chiseling their own reflection into something undeniable. The more they reached to control your path, the more they found themselves tangled in outcomes they could never predict. By the time it all started to unravel, the roles had already reversed. The illusion of power had shifted hands, and what remained wasn't vengeance, but unmistakable elevation. The journey they mocked became the script of their own exposure. Without knowing it, they participated in a revelation that was never about punishment but positioning. They weren't running the narrative, they were reacting to it. And now, in the silence between their accusations and their confusion, the only sound left is the rhythm of a truth they never thought would survive, the unfolding of someone who no longer fits inside the stories they told. They didn't just take your trust, they consumed your atmosphere. The ones who wrapped themselves in the language of care and concern were quietly dimming the environment around you, siphoning the essence that made you feel alive. Every time you brought joy into the room, they dressed it up as foolishness. Every time you leaned into hope, they rebranded it as recklessness. They didn't warn you to protect you, they warned you to keep you reachable, moldable, compliant. And by the time you started questioning your own clarity, they had already begun constructing a world where your doubt was their sanctuary. Behind the polished voices and sympathetic nods was a carefully veiled mission, to disrupt your alignment with the very pulse that kept you lit from within. The moments you called intuitive, they labeled them unstable. The insight that lifted others, They dismissed it as coincidence or ego. But what they couldn't access was the code embedded in your essence, one that kept reassembling itself every time they tried to scatter it. What they called dangerous wasn't your instability, it was your untouchable center. While they scrambled to define your radiance through the lens of their limitation, you were quietly rewriting their influence with every breath that refused to conform. Now the illusion has no scaffolding left. Their constructed image of concern has fractured under the weight of your renewal. The same joy they once cast suspicion on has become the pulse of your discernment. And the clarity they tried to dissolve? It's now the lens that reveals who they've always been. What they don't yet understand is that their performance didn't just fail, it exposed the very vacuum it was trying to conceal. In the end, they were never afraid you were fake. They were afraid you were real, and that truth would eventually arrive wearing your face. Not everyone who pretended to shield you was meant to stand beside you. While certain voices whispered caution in the ears of others, warning them to keep their distance, something greater was already aligning. A quiet, powerful convergence of kindred spirits whose presence would feel like oxygen. As their fear-based influence tried to suppress the resonance of your spirit, an unseen architecture was building around you, drawing in those who speak your frequency without needing translation. And now, the irony is no longer subtle. The very people who tried to mark you as a risk are suddenly scrambling for your attention. Desperate not because you changed, but because the world finally caught up to what you've always carried. Every attempt to curve your path into confusion has now taken root in the soil they stand on. The intentions they masked behind politeness and concern have unfolded into lessons written in their own handwriting. Each veiled sabotage they thought would knock you off balance has become a compass redirecting them back to the consequences of their intent. The disruption they tried to send your way reversed with a velocity they never saw coming. But this wasn't punishment, it was reflection. And that reflection didn't just expose their game, it revealed their fear. Not of you, but of what they lost the moment you stopped giving them access. Their confusion runs deeper than regret. Because now, standing in the presence of your evolution, they're being forced to confront everything they once denied. The person they tried to edit into silence has now become the evidence of what's real. Their tactics didn't weaken you, they refined you. Their exclusion didn't isolate you, it identified you. And now, with every layer of pretense falling from their voice, they're realizing they weren't left behind because they were unworthy of your presence, but because they were never ready to stand in the kind of light that doesn't beg to be understood. Truth has a way of making masks unbearable. The friction wasn't caused by something you faked, but by everything you couldn't hide. You weren't erased because you were wrong. You were targeted because your existence made their illusions impossible to sustain. Your clarity didn't sit well with those who thrived in distortion. Each time you showed up as your full self, it disrupted the roles they had crafted for you. Roles of weakness, of confusion, of dependency. But you didn't play along. Instead of shrinking under their projections, you took their dismissal and reshaped it into direction. What they tossed at you as chaos, you forged into structure. What they hoped would unravel, you only sharpened your center. Old versions of yourself no longer respond to the scripts they once controlled. The cravings they relied on to keep you tethered, the need for validation, the addiction to being understood, the habit of proving yourself, have dissolved into dust. They didn't just try to confine your potential, they tried to normalize your silence. But the patterns they planted began to starve when you stopped feeding them. What they sold as your ceiling became your launch pad. You stepped away from the framework that kept you apologizing for your own light, and in doing so, made their narratives irrelevant. They called it ego, but it was your return. They called it defiance, but it was your liberation. Now their strategies are eroding in plain sight. The architecture they built on control is bending under the pressure of your autonomy. They're scrambling, not because you attacked, but because you reclaimed. You didn't dismantle them with rage. You simply stopped dancing to music they no longer control. And in that stillness, the truth roared. The power they thought they had was always borrowed, always conditional. Once you saw through the frame, the portrait fell. And now, all that remains is the echo of manipulation collapsing under its own illusion, too hollow to rebuild, too exposed to be hidden again. Not everyone comes to take. Some arrive to build. That's why the door has been left slightly open, even for those who think they have nothing to offer. What matters most is the presence, the shared space, the mutual recognition that something sacred is unfolding here. Access isn't being sold, it's being extended. A shared current flows both ways now. Words won't fall into a void, they'll be met, absorbed, and held. And for those who feel unseen in the world, this is an invitation, not a transaction. Come as you are. If you're able to give, the movement grows. If not, take what you need. No one walks away empty-handed. Let's turn the lens inward. There's no version of you from the past that would have guessed you'd be standing this grounded. You didn't just endure what was thrown your way, you reshaped your entire landscape around it. The voices that once tried to drown you out have become background noise to a frequency that now speaks only truth. The practices that once felt like survival rituals have evolved into sacred technologies of clarity. The solitude that once echoed with doubt now hums with wisdom. You're not returning to who you were. You're stepping into a self that couldn't have been born any other way. Everything that tried to unravel you only opened a gate. The pain didn't just toughen your skin, it expanded your soul's reach. The resistance didn't break your stride, it calibrated your precision. And now, your radiance isn't fragile. Your love doesn't shrink for approval. Your joy isn't dependent on circumstance. It's all sharper, deeper, unmistakably real. And it wasn't gifted to you by peace. It was earned in the tension, the silence, the pressure that forced your truth to rise when everything else fell away. What tried to stop you has only confirmed what you're here to become. What was meant to shrink you became the very sequence that expanded your design. Every projection hurled your way became raw material for construction. They threw their indifference, their judgment, their limits, and unknowingly handed you the blueprint for liberation. Where they sought to trap you in doubt, something greater rerouted the tension into a pressure chamber of clarity. Every glance meant to make you feel invisible became a signal for the unseen realms to confirm your presence louder. Every refusal became a redirection. Every dismissal, a divine recalibration. You weren't just growing. You were being forged in the echoes of everything they couldn't contain. What they tried to explain away as coincidence has now built patterns too precise to deny. The quiet instincts they mocked are now turning into coordinates, unlocking realities no longer theoretical. The gifts they called delusion are now writing truths into physical form, visible even to those who once refused to look. What they labeled a dream has unfolded into geography they can no longer pretend doesn't exist. The very outcomes they said were unreachable are now surrounding you like air, undeniable, stable, and continuous. And the faces watching now hold a strange mixture: confusion, awe, and the weight of having been wrong. Control was never theirs to wield. It was an illusion built on borrowed time. As the layers of distortion fall away, it's becoming painfully clear that the person they tried to shape never belonged to their design. You were never an accessory to their comfort. You were a frequency their system couldn't stabilize. And the moment your memory stirred, that sacred memory of who you've always been, the game dissolved. Not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped playing. What they thought they were protecting themselves from wasn't danger. It was destiny. And now that it's walking upright, there's nothing they can do to contain it. They thought their apology would serve as a reset button, like years of misalignment could be swept away by a sentence. What they fail to see is that you've moved beyond the gravitational pull of their emotional ecosystem. Their gestures feel weightless now, like paper trying to hold back a tide. You no longer orbit the chaos they called connection. The emotional tricks that once stirred your empathy now echo empty in a room you've already outgrown. Their sudden desire to renegotiate boundaries isn't about healing, it's about re-entry. But the gate they once walked through has vanished, replaced by an inner terrain they can no longer navigate. They're trying to hook into a frequency you no longer broadcast. They think your kindness is still an entry point, that your warmth means you've forgotten the fire it took to find yourself. But you've grown sharper in ways they don't recognize. You've learned the subtle difference between vulnerability and exploitation, between someone needing help and someone rehearsing a scene to regain control. The emotional language they once used to confuse you now speaks too loudly to ignore. You've become fluent in energy, and their stories can't mask their intent anymore. There's a new truth breathing inside you now. Not everyone should have access to your light. What once felt like obligation now feels like protection. Of self, of spirit, of peace. You've come to understand that presence is currency, and you no longer spend it where it's undervalued. You're not dimming to accommodate low ceilings. You're not folding just because someone else refuses to stand up straight. And the beauty is, while some recoil from your glow, others rise in it. They don't flinch at your strength. They find their own. They don't second-guess your joy. They dance in it. They don't wait for you to shrink. They expand with you. These are not bystanders. These are builders, witnesses, co-creators. And they never needed proof. They already knew. Not everyone fears what shines. Some are drawn to the brilliance not to steal from it, but to honor it, to match it with their own. These are the ones who never asked you to shrink, who never flinched when your presence shifted the atmosphere. They saw you for what you truly are, a catalyst, not a competitor. And while others are now trapped in the aftermath of their own deceit, watching as their illusions collapse around them, you're stepping into a new terrain, one built not by manipulation, but by resonance. This is where alignment stops being theory and starts becoming your daily rhythm. The tension is dissolving. The right people are arriving. The right path is revealing. What once felt like resistance now feels like velocity. Every connection appearing now carries a signature of recognition. No need for long explanations, no need to prove your value. They already sense it. The unseen forces guiding your path are no longer whispering. They're clearing entire corridors for your expansion. Moments of doubt are replaced with waves of clarity. The distractions that once kept you cycling in survival are gone, and in their place is a flow that feels like breathing for the first time. And you're no longer working against the current. You've become the current. This evolution is not about forcing outcomes. It's about allowing what already belongs to you to meet you on level ground. The more you release the weight that was never yours to carry, the more your world bends in your favor. Your ideas move faster. Your awareness sharpens. Your ability to call things into being accelerates. Joy becomes less of a reaction and more of a state. Peace becomes less of a goal and more of a home. And love, real love, stretches beyond relationships and into every inch of your experience. This isn't a reward. It's the return of everything that was always waiting for you to remember your original frequency. There was always something waiting for you just beyond the static. Something precise, vibrant, and utterly aligned with your essence. But the interference of certain voices, intentions, and environments distorted the signal. Now that the clutter has been cleared, the channel is open, and what's arriving is tailored, not accidental. The shift is visible. Interactions feel warmer. Your inner rhythm has returned. You're no longer shaping yourself to fit rooms that felt too narrow. You're not softening your tone to make others feel secure in their false sense of control. What was once muted has become magnetic. And the contrast between who you used to be and who you've stepped into is so stark, people don't know where to place you anymore. Their outdated image no longer matches what stands before them. What's rippling through the unseen right now isn't confusion, it's recognition. It's not the fact that you survived that has unsettled them. It's that you reinvented yourself from the fragments they tried to scatter. The game they designed to keep you locked into hesitation has become the very terrain where your clarity sharpened. The same emotional machinery they built to keep you from rising has now collapsed under the pressure of your emergence. Their web didn't catch you. It tore apart trying. The structure they used to define you has no foundation left to stand on. And the silence you offer now? It's louder than any answer they were prepared to receive. Some souls aren't meant to merely outlast struggle. They're wired to distill it into force. Not by pretending it never happened, but by metabolizing it into movement. The ones who carry divine memory don't just exit the fire, they extract knowledge from it. They don't just untangle manipulation, they build frameworks from its collapse. That's what you've become, not a survivor, but a system reset. A walking declaration that authentic presence cannot be engineered by deception or diminished by pressure. You are the outcome they never considered, the result they couldn't prevent, and the mirror that will keep reflecting what they chose not to become. They miscalculated the effect of their doubt. What they tried to silence has become amplified. The very tools they dismissed as imaginary have evolved into instruments of undeniable clarity. When they labeled your inner knowing as unstable, when they tried to distort your perception with ridicule and subtle jabs, they weren't just resisting your truth, they were recording their own undoing. Each sarcastic glance, each backhanded comment, each attempt to discredit your inner compass was being archived in the quiet mechanisms of divine order. And while they mistook your restraint for uncertainty, something far greater was preparing a response they couldn't anticipate. Unfiltered validation, unfolding without your permission or their control. The visions they tried to dilute are materializing with such eerie precision that even those who once scoffed are pausing. Not because they've suddenly become believers, but because their denial has nowhere left to hide. The insights you used to whisper in caution are now echoing through their lived reality. Their mockery has turned into silence, not from reverence, but from discomfort. You're not just sensing, you're revealing. And what's flowing through you now is untouched by their cynicism. These gifts are expanding, not because they were granted anew, but because they were finally freed from the interference they brought with them. It's become obvious now, what you thought was your own blockage was never yours to carry. The distortion was never within you. It was surrounding you. Their presence was a constant interference pattern that clouded what was always sharp. The moment their energy was cut loose, your clarity returned like a signal unburdened by noise. You're tapping into realms with accuracy that bypasses explanation. You're receiving with a precision that can't be explained away. And they're left on the sidelines, realizing too late that what they treated like a glitch was the beginning of something monumental. They could have witnessed the unveiling. Instead, they chose to interfere, and missed the miracle in the process. They gambled everything trying to undermine what they never understood, and now they're stuck watching the expansion they were once invited to witness. What they tried to label as delusion has become undeniable evidence. Their jokes have aged poorly. Their dismissals now sound like envy dressed as intellect. As you move forward with a presence that can't be imitated and a force that can't be mimicked, they're left studying the very blueprint they once tried to shred. What they thought was an illusion is unfolding with precision, and they're beginning to grasp the weight of what they lost, not by accident, but by decision. There's a silence surrounding them now, but it's not peace, it's absence. While your life is aligning, their own rituals feel empty. While you walk through doors that open before you arrive, they stand in hallways that never lead anywhere. The space they once used to ridicule your intuition is now echoing with their own disconnection. Their practices feel mechanical. Their affirmations feel flat. The path they tried to block for you has turned into a mirror, reflecting what they refused to cultivate in themselves. They weren't prepared for the consequence of tampering with something protected. What they interfered with was not merely personal. It was sacred. And still, even when it would have been easier to retaliate, you held your ground. You chose dignity over spite, insight over impulse. At every turning point where bitterness begged for a voice, you listened to something deeper. The strength you showed wasn't loud, but it was loud enough to shake the very structures they built to confine you. Now, what you embody is more than survival. It's mastery born from restraint. It's grace forged through resistance. And the ones who tried to destabilize your purpose are now watching the elevation they couldn't prevent. Not because they ran out of tactics, but because you stopped needing to react. And in that stillness, something ancient moved in your favor.